right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back live. And again, we're going to have a report coming out in the next hour or so at Infowars.com dealing with the #1 news story that no one is pointing out, that no one is understanding, that no one seems to get or understand. The Fukushima complex has 6 reactors. Fukushima 1 blew up Saturday. The government lied and said it hadn't melted down and later admitted it had melted down, but said the radiation isn't a threat or a problem. Then today, Fukushima #3 blew up with 10 times conservatively the spectacular explosion, throwing equipment and wreckage thousands of feet in the air instantly. There is no doubt that its uranium rods have been blown sky high. There is no doubt intense radiation has now been released, and the Japanese government is involved in a giant cover-up. And America and our media is in a catatonic state, unable to even report what's going on and what's happening. Now, there is an article by Paul Joseph Watson at prisonplanet.com that we need to get out to everyone. We need to get it out to everyone right now so they understand, so the government can't cover this up. Remember, they cover up how dangerous the naked body scanners are. USA Today, Friday. Remember, they cover up how dangerous depleted uranium is. By the way, let's get Dr. Doug Rockey on today. That's our answer. Nuclear physicist, get him on. Boom. They cover that up and tell the troops it's okay to use, when before 1991 they said it was deadly and the troops couldn't use it. They don't care. They will cover up the magnitude of this. We have seen 2 giant nuclear reactors blow up in spectacular mushroom cloud events. And the media is buying the Japanese government, who's already been caught lying ad nauseum statement that they don't think any radiation's been released. Give me a break. And they are going to sit here and spin this like it's no big deal. Radiation from Fukushima would take 7 days to reach U.S. This is by Paul Joseph Watson on Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. Prevailing wind conditions would send fallout drifting towards West Coast. Radioactive particles from the stricken Fukushima nuclear facility, you mean the exploding facility, would take around a week to reach Alaska and 11 days to reach Los Angeles, according to AccuWeather analysis, which highlights the fact that prevailing winds over the region would send any potential fallout from the crisis-hit plant drifting towards West Coast cities in the United States. And then we have a Fox News clip with a nuclear physicist saying the same thing, in case you don't want to believe AccuWeather or us. Given the fact that many analysts believe the Japanese government is grossly understating the amount of radioactive particles related to the separate explosions to affect the Fukushima plant, one of which occurred Saturday and the other earlier today. Monitoring stations in Alaska will not know if there is a threat from such radiation until Saturday at the earliest. Some estimates I see are 3 to 4 days. An AccuWeather.com analysis highlights how prevailing wind trajectories would take the radiation from a westerly direction. They say westerly, but it's really easterly direction, but towards the west coast of the United States. A typical wind trajectory across the Pacific is westerly. Again, that's generally towards the west, but it circles east. So that's how you can use east or west as the term. But the point is it goes east to west, and we're east of it. A typical wind trajectory across the Pacific is westerly, since there is often a large dome of high pressure over the central Pacific and an area of low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska, writes meteorologist Megan Evans. Today's localized winds are set to carry any radiation out into the Pacific from a northwesterly to southeasterly direction. However, the wind direction will switch to an offshore direction Monday night into Tuesday, threatening to send the radiation towards the population, writes Evans. That's AccuWeather. This is not good news, since a onshore direction would blow most of the radiation towards populated areas. An added threat is that higher elevations, just 4 miles inland from the power plants. If a temperature inversion sets up the atmosphere, radiation could be trapped. Continuing, the worst case scenario is that localized winds could take the fallout south to Tokyo, and the prevailing westerly winds would also carry upper atmospheric particles toward the United States. Now, guys, there's a video in this article, a couple minutes long, from Fox News, in Paul Watson's article titled, "Radiation from Fukushima Would Take 7 Days to Reach U.S." I want to play that video in a moment. Continuing here. Previous studies have documented that dust from Asia, especially from deserts and industrial regions of China, routinely crosses the Pacific Ocean on prevailing winds to sully the air over the western U.S., highlights Massey Santos Ballin, a student in science communication program at the University of California, Santa Cruz. I don't know why we're quoting them. It's well known that Mongolian desert dust blows into Texas every year. The Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory has also studied how about a third of the airborne lead particles recently collected at 2 sites in San Francisco Bay Area came from Asia, from the reactors that don't have scrubbers. Yeah, that's a coal plant study. Weather conditions will hugely influence where any potential radiation falls. If there is a significant amount of rainfall, which has been forecast over the next few days, the majority of the radiation will fall in a localized area, which we hope happens over the ocean. However, drier conditions will allow any radiation to travel much further. As we featured in an earlier report, nuclear expert Joe Cicerone also fears that radiation from the Japanese nuclear plant could also reach the West Coast. When Fox News host Chris Wallace questioned whether radioactivity could travel thousands of miles across the Pacific, he responded, "Oh, absolutely. Chernobyl, which happened about 25 years ago, the radioactivity spread around the entire northern hemisphere. It depends how many of these core meltdowns and how successful they are in containing it once the disaster happens." Once the disaster happens, it's already blown sky high at 2 major reactors. Fukushima number 3, 5 hours ago, blew up and it was so explosive it formed a mushroom cloud. That's how high it ejected what was inside that facility. I mean, it's a huge superpower explosion inside the reactor. What do you think's going on? And I'm trying to be calm here. I am just sick and tired of the media Friday and Saturday saying, oh, there's no meltdown, there's nothing happening. No, there was just all these radioactive isotopes being picked up all over Japan and off the coast by the U.S. Navy. Do we have that Fox News clip? Let's go ahead and play that clip. Here it is.
Joining us now is Joe Cirincione, who's an expert on nuclear issues. Mr. Cirincione, Japanese officials are now talking about fighting 2 partial meltdowns in nuclear reactors. Briefly, what's going on and potentially how dangerous?
This is an unprecedented crisis. It is extremely serious. One of the reactors has had half their core exposed already. This is the one they're now flooding with seawater in a desperate effort to prevent it from a complete meltdown. They also have lost control of a second reactor right next to it that is a partial meltdown, and there actually is a third reactor at a related site about 20 kilometers away that they've also lost control over. So you have multiple reactor crises at the same time. We've never had a situation like this before.
And what does it mean if you have a meltdown of a nuclear core?
The worst case scenario is that the fuel rods fuse together. The temperatures get so hot that they melt together into a radioactive molten mass that bursts through the containment mechanisms and is exposed to the outside. So they spew radioactivity into the ground, into the air, into the water. Some of that radioactivity could carry in the atmosphere to the west coast of the United States.
Really? I mean, thousands of miles across the Pacific.
Oh, absolutely. In Chernobyl, which happened about 25 years ago, the radioactivity spread around the entire northern hemisphere. It depends how many of these cores melt down and how successful they are on containing it once this disaster happens.
Now, you talk about the possibility of a huge exposure. The Japanese officials so far have evacuated people 12 miles from these plants. Is that far enough?
Not under a meltdown scenario, and you've seen these evacuation radiuses extend as the crisis has developed. First it was 2, then it was 6, now it's 12. We're told by some reporters on the ground that actually 50 kilometers out they're being blocked from access. So the effective evacuation area is actually larger than the official one that's been declared.
Put this in context. Japanese officials had been rating this as a 4 on a scale that I didn't even know existed, of 1 to 7 for nuclear events. How does the situation in Japan, as it now stands, compare to 3 Mile Island in this country in 1979 and Chernobyl that you mentioned in Russia in 1986?
If it were to stop right now, 4 might be a fair categorization of this, a local event without significant injury. But if it continues, it will certainly get to 5, which is the 3 Mile Island category of a serious event. We almost lost 3 Mile Island. It almost went meltdown. It stopped at the last minute. That's the situation we're fighting to maintain here in Japan. If there actually is a meltdown, that puts it into a 6, even a 7. That's the Chernobyl category, a serious nuclear incident with potential for large-scale loss of life.
So what are we talking about? 12 hours, 24, 48 hours? And what are the keys as to whether this becomes just a serious accident or a catastrophe?
We're in the key period right now, so the next 12 to 24 hours will tell us whether the Japanese officials are able to get control back over these reactors, or it's